G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the book of Ezekiel. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. Just a very quick recap of what we did last session. We're into session 29. We're going to look at chapter 37, verse 15, and 38, verse 9. Now, last session, Ezekiel was taken into a valley. He saw a vision of some very dry bones, and they were human bones. And those bones we know represented the house of Israel. And Israel was now pictured as being dried up and dead spiritually among the Gentile nations. And then they had been dead for quite some time because they were so dried up, so parched. And God asked Ezekiel a question. He said, look, can these bones live? And Ezekiel gives the only proper answer that he could give. He said, look, only you know that, God. So he deferred back to God. Only you know whether they can live or not. So then he was told to prophesy to these dry bones, and then God promised that breath would enter into them, but then they would become spiritually alive as a nation. But we saw that it takes place in stages. We had bone to bone, and we had sinews, and we had flesh, and then we had skin, and then finally we have the breath of life being breathed into them. So what that was saying is that restoration takes place in stages. The first stage we have is in unbelief and preparation for judgment, followed by the second stage, which is a regathering in faith and preparation for the blessing of the kingdom. Now we also saw that there was a noise, that he heard a noise in this as he prophesied to these bones. He heard a noise, and we said that noise represented the First World War with the start of the Zionist movement. And then there was an earthquake after earthquake was after that, and that earthquake was World War II. And after World War II, we had the re-establishment of the state of Israel, 1948. So he's then told to prophesy again, and later on, breath would come into them, and they became spiritually alive. So that's it in a nutshell, very small nutshell. Okay, so we see now the sign of two sticks in chapter 37, 15 to 28. What do these two sticks represent? This is the second main section of Ezekiel 37. And in these verses 15 to 28, we deal with this sign of the two sticks. This whole chapter is a symbolic chapter. In verses 1 to 14, Ezekiel dealt with the symbol of the dry bones. And now we have the symbol of the two sticks. Verses 15 to 28 is subdivided into three smaller units, the first of which is in verse 15 to 23, which speaks about the reunion of Judah and Israel. And it can be divided further on, again, into three more points. So here we have 15 to 23, the reunion of Judah and Israel, and we have the sign in verses 15 to 17. The word of Jehovah came again unto me, saying, And thou, son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions. And join them for thee one to another into one stick, that they may become one in thy hand. Now, this passage, these two verses here, three verses here, deal with the sign itself. Verse 15, the word of Jehovah now comes to Ezekiel once again. And in verse 16, the word of Jehovah now concerns two sticks. And here we have he says, Thou, son of man, take thee one stick, write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. So the children of Israel included the tribes of Benjamin and Simeon, who were aligned, in this case, with Judah. So his companions, meaning Judah's companions of Israel, comprising the two tribes of Benjamin and Simeon. That's Judah is the southern kingdom. Then Ezekiel is told in the same verse to take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Now, remember, Joseph was the father of Ephraim. Now, he was not only the most prominent of Joseph's sons, but he's also the most prominent tribe of the northern kingdom. He's the largest tribe. So while the first stick represents the kingdom of Judah, it included the two tribes of Israel aligned with Judah, Benjamin and Simeon. So there's three tribes down the south. Second stick stands for the northern kingdom of Israel. And the name on this stick was to be Joseph, the father of Ephraim. And because his became the most prominent tribe. And all the house of Israel, his companions. So this refers to the other 9 tribes besides Ephraim, and his companions in this portion of the verse would be Ephraim's companions. So altogether then, verse 16 deals with the 2 Jewish kingdoms after the death of Solomon, which arose after the kingdom split. One represents Judah and the other Judah in the south, and the other the northern kingdom of Israel in the north. Now with Judah we have Benjamin and Simeon, and with Israel we have the largest tribe Ephraim, whose companions are the other 9 tribes. And then in verse 17 we have the actual joining together of these 2 sticks. Join them for thee one to another into one stick. Now the Hebrew word here for echad, for one, is used here 3 times. Join echad to another echad into echad, so that they may become echadim in thy hand. So the word echadim here is in the plural form of echad. So we can, what do we say? So we can see that this word really expresses a compound unity, where 2 become united together as one. So that's the sign of the 2 sticks. The 2 sticks being held end to end, like that, are being united together as one. And then we have the explanation in verses 18 to 20. Now, we're told what the sign of the sticks are. Now we have the explanation of what this symbolic act actually means. And when the children of your people shall speak unto you, saying, Will you not show us what you meanest by these? Say unto them, Thus says the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, the tribes of Israel his companions, and I'll put them with it, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. And the sticks whereon you write shall be in your hand before their eyes. This is God saying to him, you're going to write in front of the people's eyes. So Ezekiel will now actually take 2 sticks as a symbolic act, and he's going to write the different words on each stick. And then he's going to join them end to end so that they become one stick. Now, that will cause the people to inquire in verse 18, what are you doing? And what does it mean? And so the prophet's symbolic act will cause the people to now ask certain questions. When the children of your people shall speak unto you and ask the question, what's the purpose of this symbolic act? And they demonstrate what the purpose of the act itself was. It was intended to raise the question, will you not show us what you mean by these? That was the purpose of the act. The people's question in verse 18 is answered in verse 19. And the answer is, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim. Remember, Joseph is the father of Ephraim, although Joseph is seen here as being in the hand of Ephraim. And the tribes of Israel, his companions, that's the northern kingdom. And the word his here refers to Ephraim's. And then the word tribes refers to the other 9 tribes who are aligned with Ephraim to form the northern kingdom. And I'll put them with it, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. That is, in God's hand. So the explanation, according to verse 19, is that Judah and Israel are to become one nation once again. Now, having given the answer to the question of verse 18, now in verse 20, we come to the instruction. And the sticks whereon you write shall be in your hand before their eyes. The point here is that Ezekiel is to keep these sticks in his hand in the presence of the people as he's explaining the meaning of this symbolic act. So there is evidence now in verse 20 that the sticks actually remained as 2 separate sticks. This was not a miraculous joining of 2 sticks into one. No miracle has occurred here. So the end of one stick is being held against the end of the other stick, and Ezekiel's hand is over the 2 ends, holding him in such a way that it looks just like one stick. So at this point, God did not choose to perform a miracle and actually join them together. They still remain 2 sticks, but in Ezekiel's hands, they appear as one stick. And now, in dealing with the reunion of Judah and Israel, then, He has presented the sign in verses 15 to 17. He's explained it in verses 18 to 20. Now in verses 21 to 23, he's going to bring out the application. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord Jehovah, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they're gone, and I'll gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I'll make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. So in the application of the meaning of his symbolic act, the prophet emphasizes three things. First of all, in verse 21, there's going to be a regathering. Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they're gone, and will gather them on every side and then bring them back into their own land. So the first point is the Jews are to be regathered back into their own land. Okay, the second point of the application in verse 22 now emphasizes what the sticks emphasized, and that is the unification of Judah and Israel. I'll make them one nation in the land, that's in Israel. 1 Chronicles 17:21 speaks of this as well. And the place where they are to become one nation is upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. And that one king will be David. And this is according to verse 24 of Ezekiel 37. But also, they will have only one God over them, according to Zechariah 14, verse 9. Zechariah 14:9. Now, once their unification comes about, it will remain indivisible, because he goes on to say, they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all, never ever again. So, following their regathering will come their reunification. When that happens, it means Israel will never again be divided into two nations. This is a point also made by Jeremiah 3, verse 18. Jeremiah 3:18. The third thing by way of application found in verse 23 is their cleansing. This means there'll be no more defilement. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. Idols obviously refers to idolatry. Detestable things here refers at times to specific violations of the Mosaic law relating to the eating of unclean things. Transgression refers to specific violations of the Mosaic law. Now, all of these forms of defilement will be removed as a result of this cleansing. And as already we saw in chapter 36, the cleansing is going to be the prelude to the permanent salvation. And I'll save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, and I will cleanse them. So the result of this salvation and their cleansing is, so shall they be my people, and I will be their God. So this first subdivision of the sign of the two sticks in verses 15 to 23 has now emphasized the reunion of Judah and Israel. And then continuing from there, the second division within this section comprises verses 24 to 25, which now deal with the restoration of the throne of David. And my servant David, verse 24, my servant David shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in mine ordinances and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers dwelt. And they shall dwell therein, they and their children and their children's children forever. And David my servant shall be their prince forever. So as part of the sign of the two sticks, verses 24 to 25 also teach that there's going to be a king over Israel, going to be one king over Israel. and has already been spelled out a few verses earlier, back in verse 22. Now we find that this one king is David, and there will be a restoration of the Davidic throne. So the first part of verse 24 deals with the position of David, where he has two offices. First office is that of a king. He says, my servant David shall be king over them. Now, we already saw this earlier in an earlier section of Ezekiel. This is from Israel's viewpoint, right? David is to be their king. But from the viewpoint of the Messiah, David is a prince. Why? Because Messiah is the king over the entire world, and he sits as king in Israel. The second office found in verse 24 is that of shepherd. They all shall have one shepherd. And as their shepherd, he'll do two things. First of all, he will guide Israel. And then second, he will feed Israel. So, as a king, David is going to rule over Israel. And as their shepherd, he's going to both guide and feed them. Never again will Israel have a leader who will lead them astray. In the second part of verse 24, he deals with the observance of Israel. They also shall walk in mine ordinances, and they shall observe my statutes to do them. So under David's leadership as king, and under his shepherding as he guides and feeds them, Israel will walk in the commandments which are going to be in effect during the Messianic kingdom. And this body of law can be called the millennial law, new law system in the kingdom. He goes on to say, and they shall dwell in the land. Oh, sorry, verse 20, in verse 25, first part of verse 25, he now emphasizes the possession of the land, the ownership of the land. They shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers dwelt. So here the emphasis is on the restoration and the possession of the land, but also the enjoyment of it by dwelling in the land. So they shall dwell therein. That is, the first generation of Jews who enter the kingdom. Then he goes on to say, their children and their children's children forever. Now, just by the by, the Hebrew word for forever is ad olam, which means unto the age. And that age is the kingdom age. So to the end, this means that they're going to live to the end of the kingdom age. And Israel will have continuous possession and control dwelling in the land. Now, this section ends as it began with the position of David at the end of verse 25. Now, back in verse 24, we noted that in his position, David will have two offices of king and shepherd. Now, in verse 25, the second part of verse 25, we read of his third office, which is prince. David, my servant, shall be their prince forever. Again, whereas from the viewpoint of Israel, David is their king, but from the viewpoint of Messiah, David is a prince, and he'll be prince forever. Again, Hebrew word here is le olam, from which means for an age. So, and this age is throughout the Messianic kingdom, and David will function as a prince. Now we're going to see a new temple in verses 26 to 28. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I'll place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. The nations shall know that I am Jehovah that sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. And now this section ends with a very short discussion of the new temple found in these three verses here. First part of verse 26 deals again with the new covenant, which of course is the basis and the foundation of the future millennial temple. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, which is also an everlasting covenant with them. So the new covenant, which we've seen also in Jeremiah, is going to be the basis of a new sanctuary. Now, the second half of verse 26 gives us the provisions of this new covenant, from which he now mentions three specific ones. First of all, God will place them in the land. So Israel is to be placed in the land so that they'll not only have the right of possession, but they'll actually be dwelling in the land. And that's the first provision of the new covenant in this verse. And second, it says, I will multiply them. So the second provision is an increase in the Jewish population in the land once they have settled there. Remember, they're going to have 1,000 years there. Third, I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. This refers to what? Refers to the fourth Jewish temple or the millennial temple. My sanctuary translates to Hebrew mikdashi. I'll put it mikdashi, which means my holy place. So the emphasis here is on the new building's holiness. And it is to be there forevermore. Now, again, here we have the Hebrew word here is le'olam, which means it is to be God's temple for a limited period of time or an age, and that age is the kingdom age or the millennial age. In actual fact, there is no classical Hebrew word that actually means eternity. None at all. The closest that Hebrew can come to that concept would be an expression like without end. And that is, in fact, how God is described. He's described as God without end. So although the word forever is very often found in the English translation, the Hebrew is either le'olam, which means onto an age, or ad olam, which means until an age. So one is onto an age, one is until an age. So it's talking about a period of time, and very often it simply is a reference to the period of the Messianic kingdom. Now in verse 27, he deals with the relationship between God and Israel. And in this relationship, God says, my tabernacle also shall be with them. So whereas before God called it my sanctuary or a mikdashi, which means my holy place, now a different Hebrew word is used. It's mishkani. Mishkani, which literally means my presence dwelling. Now, whereas the emphasis on the previous word was on the holiness aspect of the fourth temple, the emphasis in this word is on the new temple as a dwelling place for the Shekinah glory. Because the Shekinah glory will take up residence within this millennial temple, as we shall see as we go through the book of Ezekiel. Next Hebrew word used is Elohim, which literally means over them. So the Shekinah glory is to be over them, serving as a canopy over Israel. Same point is made in Isaiah 4 verses 5 to 6. Now, as we've said many times already by Ezekiel, when God's temple is in the midst of them, the result for Israel is, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Finally, in verse 28, he deals with the results for the Gentiles. The nations shall know that I am Jehovah that sanctifies Israel. So the Gentile nations will recognize that this restoration of Israel with God's temple in the midst of them means that Israel's God is indeed the only true God. And the timing of when this will happen is stated as, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. So when God's fourth temple is standing in the midst of Israel, its very existence there will cause the Gentiles to recognize that the God of Israel is the only God there is. And the word here used for my sanctuary is again mikdashi, which means my holy place, emphasizing the holiness of it. Now, just don't get the millennial temple confused with the temple that the Jews will build for the tribulation period. Different temple. The tribulation temple will be the third temple. This one, the millennial temple, will be the fourth temple. So we're going to see that there'll be a temple. Again, the Hebrew word for evermore here is le'olam, which means for an age. So again, there'll be the temple in the midst of Israel for the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. For now, that is all Ezekiel chooses to say about this millennial temple, because he's going to give a massive detail in chapters 40 to 48. 9 chapters. We're going to deal with that when we actually get to those chapters in our studies. Now we have 13 promises here from Ezekiel 37 that he's going to that he did for Israel in the future, or he does for Israel in the future. First up, we see that in verse 21 of 37, God will gather Israel from all the nations. God will also bring them to their own land. That's the second promise. Third promise, Israel will be one nation. Never again will they be two nations. Never again will they be divided. David will be their king. You know, one king. The kingdom will never be divided. That's the fifth promise. Israel will never fall into idolatry again. That's verse 23. And then the seventh is God will save them and cleanse them in verse 22. David the king will be over them in verse 24. Israel will dwell in the land forever, verse 25. The new covenant of peace, verse 26. God will multiply them in the land, verse 26. God will establish the millennial temple in verses 26 to 27. And that temple will then be a testimony to Gentile nations in verse 28. Okay. The restoration of Israel, this is the whole section we're in. We're going to look at Gog and Magog now in 38:1 to 39:16. This new section of the book of Ezekiel deals with Gog and Magog, and this goes from 38:1 to 39:16. This is a pretty lengthy section, but it's subdivided into two main divisions. First is 38:1 to 23, in which Ezekiel deals with the invasion and the destruction of Gog. Then we're going to go to 39:1 to 16, which deals with the overthrow of Gog. We're going to look at the detail of these two passages, and the procedure to be followed here is to deal with the verse-by-verse exposition first. Then we're going to deal with the issue of the timing of this invasion. We're going to seek to answer the question, when does this invasion occur in the end time program? Okay, the invasion and destruction of Gog. This is 1 to 23. We're going to see the Northern Confederacy in verses 1 to 6. And the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And I'll turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I'll bring you forth and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them handling swords. Persia, Cush, and Put with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his hordes, the house of Togarmah in the uttermost parts of the earth of the north, and all his hordes, even many peoples with you. The verses 1 to 6 basically deal with the Northern Confederacy, showing who is in charge and who is allied together. In verse 1, the word of Jehovah again comes to Ezekiel to introduce a brand new area of prophetic revelation. In verse 2, he's told to address the leadership of this confederacy of verses 1 to 6. Son of man, and that's the title. That title here marks the beginning of a new prophecy. God says, set your face toward Gog, or more literally, from the meaning of the Hebrew text, prophesy in opposition to. Who is he to prophesy in opposition to? In that verse, it is Gog. Now, some people have misunderstood the etymology of the word and take it as a name, and so they've been searching around for some time or for someone with that name. But Gog is not a proper name. It's not a person's name, but it's a title of the ruler of Magog. In fact, looking at the term Magog, it will be seen that Gog is simply a shortened form of the name Magog. So Gog here is a title of the ruler of Magog, in the same way as the word Pharaoh is not a proper name, but the title of the ruler of Egypt. The pharaohs had names like Ramesses or Thutmose and so on, but the title of them all was Pharaoh. Take the word Tsar as another example. It's not a proper name. It's simply a title of the kings of Russia. Kaiser was not a proper name, title for the king of Germany. The Shah, well, it used to be not a proper name, but it was for a title for the king of Iran decades and decades ago. So this is the same thing here with Gog, which is not a proper name, but it's simply the title of the ruler or the king of Magog. And we're told that Gog is of the land of Magog. And that tells us where Gog comes from. He's a Magogite. Not a maggot, he's a Magogite. He's of Magog. Now, going back to Genesis chapter 10, verse 2, we discover that Magog was a son of Japheth. And his descendants were located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which today is the southern part of Russia. Now, besides being king of Magog, so that he has the title of God, he's also the prince of some other territories. In fact, this verse tells us that Gog rules 3 other territories. Technically, he's not their king because he's first and foremost the king of Magog, but he's also the prince of 3 other territories. And the first of these is Rosh. Now, some translations, rather than transliterating the name to read Rosh, translate it as head prince, or more likely chief prince. But this is a place name and should be translated as such. So first of all, he is the prince of Rosh. Now, the area of Rosh was in the northern part of European Russia. Now, Magog was in the southern part of European Russia. And in fact, our modern word Russia stems from this root Rosh. The second territory of which he's a prince is Meshech. In Genesis 10, verse 2, we learn that Meshech was also a son of Japheth. He's also referred to in Ezekiel 27:13 and Ezekiel 32:26. Meshech eventually gave rise to the name Moscow. That's why the 2 names have the same consonants. Meshech and Moscow have the same MSK sounds. Meshech, Moscow, same MSK sounds in Hebrew. Third area which he's prince is Tubal. Tubal was also a son of Japheth, according to Genesis 10:2, and he's also referred to in Ezekiel 27:13 and 32:26. Tubal gave rise to the modern city of Tobolsk in Siberia, Tobolsk, Tobolsk, and today Tobolsk is the capital of Siberia, and that was where the Tsarist family was assassinated by the communists. It's also the place where Dr. Fruchtenbaum was born. Now, what we have here then is Gog as king of Magog and prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Putting this together, we also learn that the area included here is southern European Russia, northern European Russia, and also Siberia. And these comprised the one country which was known until recently as the Soviet Union. Then Ezekiel is told to prophesy against him, against Gog. And to prophesy against is the same as set your face toward Gog. The 4 territorial names that are given here all form what used to be the Soviet Union, covering all of northern and southern European Russia and Siberia, which is the Asian part of Russia. Now, according to some rabbinic legends and traditions, Gog and Magog are armies hostile to Israel before the coming of the Messiah, son of David. Israel's war with them is also when Messiah, son of Joseph, is going to be killed, they say. Now, the background to this teaching is the difficulty the rabbis had in understanding how some biblical prophecies refer to a suffering and dying Messiah, while others present a glorious, conquering, and reigning Messiah. Now, we understand these prophecies as being fulfilled in 2 separate comings of the one Messiah. Jesus came the first time to fulfill the suffering prophecies, but he'll come again to fulfill the conquering and reigning prophecies in the second time. But the rabbis invented the concept of 2 separate Messiahs. The first would be called the son of Joseph. He would come and he would war against Gog and Magog, according to these 2 chapters here, and he would be killed. By dying, he would fulfill the suffering passages. Then the second Messiah, the son of David, would come and conquer Gog and Magog and set up the Messianic kingdom and raise the first Messiah back to life. Now, the rabbis generally understood that these prophecies refer to what was known as that area encompassing the Soviet Union. In fact, The Art Scroll series in the book of Ezekiel, which is the Orthodox commentary in the book of Ezekiel, it states that the Gaonim had a tradition that these countries were indeed located in Russia. The Gaonim, they were simply the presidents of the two great Babylonian Talmudic academies. And the rabbis say that the Gaonim, the presidents of these two academies, they said that this is Russia. Also, Dr. Fruchtenbaum found the following in this same series. He says, an oral tradition passed down from the Vilna Gaon states as follows. When the Russian Navy passes through the Bosphorus Strait on the way to the Dardanelles, there'll be time to put on Sabbath clothing, that is, in anticipation of the coming of the Messiah. So, based upon this passage, the rabbis also interpret it to refer specifically to what was that area encompassing the Soviet Union. The rabbis in the Russian territories and the surrounding areas taught that when the Jewish people saw the Russian Navy moving through the Bosphorus Strait, that was a time for them to put on Sabbath clothing, because that means Messiah is about to come. Now, continuing on with this passage, in verses 3 to 4, we have a specific declaration. In verse 3, there is a declaration of divine opposition. Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. So God sets himself against the schemes of Gog in this verse. And in verse 4, we read about the preparation for this invasion. I will turn you about. And this whole expression here emphasizes the fact that Gog is going to be diverted away from a planned attack somewhere else. So the picture here is that Gog is planning an attack towards one direction, perhaps towards the north, but suddenly he's completely turned around and he moves south instead. He says, I'll turn you about and I'll put hooks into your jaws. So the picture here is that God is so much in control of Gog that he could do nothing else. And I will bring you forth. So God is bringing this invasion about. And we've got to look very carefully here. He's bringing it about for reasons that will be dealt with later in this passage. So, as Gog is planning an attack in one direction, for instance, like Ukraine, God suddenly, providentially and sovereignly takes over the situation to turn Gog around, and using his rule, forces him to attack towards Israel. He'll come with, in all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them handling swords. So, what was once the Soviet Union comprising Magog, Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal will not be alone under Gog's rule. Verses 5 to 6 refer to some other specific nations who are going to be allied with Gog in this invasion. First of all, he mentions Persia. Now, Persia was a son of Japheth and is now modern Iran. He also mentions Cush. Now, Cush was a son of Ham, according to Genesis 10:6, also known as Ethiopia. Then he mentions Put. Put was a son of Ham also in Genesis 10:6. It's now known as Somaliland or Somalia. All of them with shield and helmet. So all three nations, Iran, Ethiopia, and Somalia, are all prepared for war to join the invaders from the north. Although Iran is north of Israel, Ethiopia and Somalia are basically to the south. He next mentions Gomer. Gomer was a son of Japheth in Genesis 10:2. Now, ancient rabbinic writing called the Bereshit Rabbah in chapter 37, verse 1 of that, this is a writing which predates the New Testament, the writings of the New Testament. It tells us that Gomer is Germany. In fact, rabbinic writing spells it as Germania. The Talmud also refers to Gomer as Germania. So Gomer refers to Germany and all his hordes. So this means the German part in the invasion will be to provide a massive armed force. He then mentions the house of Togarmah. Togarmah was the grandson of Japheth through Gomer in Genesis 10:3. He was the son of Gomer and the grandson of Japheth. Togarmah today includes Armenia and possibly certain sections of modern Turkey and all his hordes. So these nations will be providing numerous armed forces for the Confederacy as well. And just by the way, Armenia is within the scope of modern Russia. Finally, Ezekiel says, in the uttermost parts of the north. And in this verse, this expression specifically refers to Togarmah. But in 38:15 and 39:2, the same phrase will refer to the whole invading army headed up by Gog, king of Magog and prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, looking at any map, what will be noticed is that the uttermost part of the north in relation to Israel is Russia. And in fact, Moscow is in a direct north-south line with Jerusalem. So going due north from Jerusalem, you would eventually come to Moscow. Also, he adds here, and many peoples with you. And this can be interpreted in two ways. One possible interpretation is that it may refer to the number of the people already mentioned, by combining all of them, the nations already mentioned in verse 2 with those in verses 5 to 6, it may refer to them, the whole many peoples there. Second possible interpretation is that it may refer to other nations not specifically mentioned in these 6 verses. Now, some observations to be made concerning these nations making up the Confederacy. 6 of them were Japhethite nations, descendants of Japheth. 2 were Hamite nations. There is not a single Semite nation joining with them against Israel. Not one Arab state is part of this invasion, even though nations from both north and south are included. The Arabs will not be involved. They are a Semite nation. Now, quoting again from the Art Scroll commentary, the Orthodox commentary in the book of Ezekiel, which in turn quotes an ancient Jewish writing, the Yerushalmi Megillah, chapter 3:9. The Art Scroll says that this passage renders Magog as Gutya, which means the Goths, a group of nomadic tribes who destroyed the Scythians and made their homes in Scythian territory. Now, considering that the Goths were a Germanic people, the identification of Magog's descendants is in accord with the Targum Jonathan, another thing to Genesis 10:2, which renders Magog as Jamamia, which is in the writing Bereshit Rabbah is given as Germania. And to this day, Germania happens to be the Hebrew word for Germany. Now, the place of the invasion, in verses 7 to 9, be you prepared, yea, prepare yourself, you and all your companies that are assembled unto you, and be you a guard unto them. After many days you shall be visited, in the latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, that is gathered out of many peoples, upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. But it is brought forth out of the peoples, and they shall dwell securely, all of them. And you shall ascend, you shall come up like a storm, you shall be like a cloud to cover the land, you and all your hordes, and many peoples with you. So after dealing with the nations involved in this confederacy in verses 1 to 6, Ezekiel now tells us where this invasion is going to take place. Verse 7 deals with the preparation for it. Be you prepared, yea, prepare yourself, you. This is emphatic in that the word you is used twice. You and all your companies that are assembled unto you. In their preparation, he says, first of all, be you prepared. But second, he says, be you a guard unto them. Hebrew word here is mishma, which means a guard or protector or security. It means to take command. So Gog, we're talking about Gog here, Gog is told to be a security and to take the general responsibility for the whole confederated army, and especially for the well-being of the men making up the armed forces. And following the statement and the preparation in verse 8, we now read about the object of the invasion. In dealing with this, Ezekiel first tells us about the timing of it. It is stated as first, after many days you shall be visited, and second, in the latter years. So in stating these things, he says that it will occur during the time of the last days. It will happen during that eschatological time when God begins to move his program towards a decisive culmination. Now, the end days actually begin before the tribulation, but they include the days of the tribulation, the millennium, and so on, until we finally come to the eternal state. So this invasion will take place during the last days. Now, exactly when in these last days it is, before, during, or after the tribulation, or even after the millennium, is something we'll have to deal with later once we have concluded all that we're going to look at here on this subject. So the timing, for now, the timing of this invasion is during the last days. The object of it is, you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, that is gathered out of many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. But it is brought forth out of the peoples, and they shall dwell securely, all of them. So, specific object of this invasion is the land of Israel, to which it has been seen its inhabitants have returned. So it is an Israel that has been regathered out of many peoples. It's an Israel that has begun to rebuild the desolate and waste cities. The point of this verse then is that the invasion had to come sometime after the first worldwide regathering in unbelief in preparation for the Great Tribulation. Since there was no Jewish state before 1948, this prophecy could not have been fulfilled before that date. Only after the events of 1948 has it now been possible for it to be fulfilled. Exactly when after 1948 is something we're going to have a look at when we finish looking at the passage verse by verse. So in verse 7, we have the preparation for the invasion. And in verse 8, we have the object of it. And in verse 9, he emphasizes the extent or the massiveness of it. You shall ascend. So the picture here is not necessarily that of an aerial attack, as some people have interpreted this verse to mean. Hebrew word Allah for ascend here simply means to go up. And indeed, right throughout the scriptures, when anyone approaches Israel, it is always pictured as going up to the land of Israel or going down from the land of Israel when leaving it. So the word ascend here simply means they're heading towards and entering into the land of Israel. And then in this verse, he uses some similes to show how massive this invasion is. You shall come like a storm. You shall be like a cloud to cover the land. So it's just as when a small cloud blocks the sunlight, it casts a huge shadow over a large area of land. By the same token, this army will be so massive, it'll be like a huge shadow advancing from the north, covering the land. And those involved are, first, you, meaning Gog and his country, Magog. Second, and all your hordes. This refers to those countries over which he's prince, and so it would refer to Meshech, Tubal, and Rosh. And then third, and many peoples with you. So these are the numerous allies we talked about earlier on. So these three national groupings, Magog, the nations of which Gog is prince, and all the other allied nations are what comprises this massive invading army into Israel. Now, some biblical observations as far as we've gone so far. Now, this prophecy now presupposes that Israel is back in the land. It pictures the Jews as having returned to the land, as having settled in it, and begun the process of rebuilding it. The return spoken of in this passage is a return in unbelief, because as we're going to see, Israel is having a revival only after this invasion takes place. So this revival must come while Israel is still in a state of unbelief. This return in unbelief was already talked about back in chapter 36, verse 24 to 27. And also it was intimated in the vision of the dry bones in 37, 1 to 14. So those earlier passages form the background to what is happening here in 38 to 39. This restoration in unbelief is described in four specific ways. First, it is a land that is brought back from the sword. This means the Jews gained the land back by means of war. This will certainly not be true of the Second Worldwide Regathering, because they'll regain the land when Messiah will turn the land over to Israel. So this particular regathering, however, was accomplished by means of war. So it has to be speaking of the first worldwide regathering. Second, it is a land that is gathered out of many peoples. Now, as we look at the modern Jewish state today, the Jews there have returned from over 90 different countries. Third, it is a land with mountains that have been a continual waste. And for 2 millennia, the mountains of Israel have been a continual waste. Fourthly and lastly, it's a land that is brought forth out of the peoples, a land that is now in the process of being restored and rebuilt. Now, as we look at these statements describing Israel in this passage, one thing we should clearly become aware of is this. All of these statements are true of present-day Israel. The waste places have been rebuilt and resettled. And this is exactly what we're seeing in present-day Israel. So, you'll have to come back next week to see, when we meet next time, to see what happens. Thank you for coming along. Study hard and grow strong.